The story of Guia Lopes da Laguna MS, Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. From the first explorers to the present day, a story forged in war, sacrifice, and resilience. Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. Part 1, 16th century, the first explorers. Long before any name was etched onto this land, before any map drew its borders, this region was already a world unto itself. The vast territory that would one day become the municipality of Guia Lopes da Laguna lay deep in what was then known as Mato Grosso, a raw, uncharted interior that both beckoned and devoured. In the 16th century, Spanish expeditionaries pushing inland from Paraguay became the first outsiders to set foot here, driven by the oldest of human impulses, the hunger for conquest and the promise of riches. These were not casual journeys. The expeditions crossed roaring rivers, dense cerrado scrublands, and the sprawling wetlands of the Pantanal, one of the most punishing landscapes on Earth. But the land was not empty. The Guaycuru, Terena, and Guarani peoples had called it home for centuries. They knew every trail, every seasonal flood, every fruit, and every predator. For the European arrivals, this territory was a mystery. For the indigenous nations, it was simply home. The accounts that survived from those early incursions are fragmentary, little more than dispatches and footnotes, but they paint a consistent picture, a land of breathtaking natural abundance, open grasslands ideal for cattle, rivers teeming with fish, a biodiversity that stopped explorers in their tracks. These first encounters planted the seed of everything that followed, centuries of settlement, conflict, heroism, and growth that would eventually shape one of Brazil's most historically rich communities. Part 2, 1778, the founding of the Miranda Garrison. The year 1778 marked a turning point. The Portuguese crown, keenly aware of Spanish ambitions along its western frontier, moved decisively to plant its flag in the region. The result was the founding of the Presidio de Miranda, a military garrison established on the banks of the Miranda River. It was not just a fort, it was a statement. Portugal was here, and it intended to stay. The choice of location was deliberate and strategic. The Miranda River was a natural highway, wide enough to be navigable, vital enough to be indispensable. Around the garrison, life began to take shape. Farmers arrived, cattle ranchers followed, merchants set up stalls, families planted roots. What had begun as a military outpost slowly transformed into something more enduring, the nucleus of a community. But this frontier never was quiet. The collision of Portuguese colonizers, indigenous peoples, and Spanish neighbors created a constant undercurrent of tension, negotiation, and conflict. The Miranda Garrison became the administrative anchor for the entire south stretch of Mato Grosso, the institution around which the next wave of settlement would organize itself. Without it, the story of Guia Lopes da Laguna might never have been written.
Part 3, 1811, the birth of José Francisco Lopes. On February 26, 1811, in the small settlement of Piumi, in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais, a child was born who would one day put this remote corner of the country on the map. His name was José Francisco Lopes. He grew up in a Brazil still shaking off its colonial chains, a country searching for its identity in the aftermath of independence. From an early age, Lopes showed an uncommon affinity for the wilderness, a quiet, determined man who read the land the way others read books. As a young adult, he left Minas Gerais behind and headed into the interior. He joined geographic expeditions, honing his skills as a guide through terrain that would have baffled lesser men. Forests without trails, rivers without bridges, marshlands that swallowed the unprepared whole. Lopes moved through all of it with a calm, methodical precision that earned him a reputation as one of the finest wilderness guides in the country. In the mid-1800s, he accompanied his brother, Joaquim Francisco Lopes, on expeditions that helped open new overland routes connecting the Brillante and Niahuaque river basins, essential arteries for the expanding colonial frontier. Each journey made him more indispensable and more intimately connected to the land that would eventually bear his name. He could not have known it then, but his greatest test and his final chapter still lay ahead. Part 4, 1847 to 1848, Settling the Fazenda Jardim. Around 1847 and 1848, after years of hard travel through some of Brazil's most demanding terrain, José Francisco Lopes finally put down roots. He settled on the banks of the Miranda River, establishing what became known as the Fazenda Jardim. History records him as the first permanent resident of the land that is today the municipality of Guia Lopes da Laguna. The choice was anything but random. The land offered rich pastures, reliable water, and a commanding position along the strategic frontier with Paraguay. At the Fazenda Jardim, Lopes threw himself into cattle ranching. Over the years, he came to know that stretch of land with an intimacy that went beyond the practical. He knew where the river ran treacherous, which paths cut fastest through the brush, where man and animal could safely rest. That knowledge, accumulated mile by mile, season by season, would prove to be the most valuable asset he could offer his country when the time came. Other families followed. The Barbosas arrived, extending the small community that was quietly taking shape along the Miranda. The Fazenda Jardim became a known waypoint for drovers, travelers, and settlers moving through southern Mato Grosso. Without fanfare, without any grand announcement, the foundation of a future city was being laid, one family, one season, one story at a time. Part 5, 1856, The Treaty with Paraguay and a Necessary Move. In 1856, diplomacy reshaped the map. The Brazilian Empire and the Republic of Paraguay signed a friendship, commerce, and navigation agreement, an agreement that, on paper, was meant to settle the territorial disputes that had simmered along the border for decades. For José Francisco Lopes, the consequences were immediate and personal. His cattle operation near the Apa River suddenly found itself sitting inside a zone contested by Paraguay. The political lines drawn far away in government chambers had landed squarely in his backyard. Lopes made a practical decision. He moved. He consolidated his operations at the Fazenda Jardim on the right bank of the Miranda River, safely outside the disputed territory. It was a measured, calculated response that reflected the kind of clear-eyed pragmatism that defined the man. He was not about to pick a fight he didn't need to fight. But he was also not about to abandon the land he had worked for years to build. That 1856 treaty, however, resolved very little. It was a pause, not a peace. The underlying tensions between Brazil and Paraguay, territorial, political, and deeply personal under the rule of Francisco Solano Lopes, continued to build beneath the surface. Within a decade, they would explode into one of the most devastating wars in the history of South America. And when the storm finally broke, José Francisco Lopes would be standing in the middle of it.
Part 6, 1864 to 1867, The Paraguayan War and the Retreat from Laguna. When the War of the Triple Alliance erupted in 1864, the conflict came to southern Mato Grosso with brutal force. Paraguayan troops under Francisco Solano Lopes swept across the border, pushing deep into Brazilian territory with a well-armed, well-organized army. The Brazilian forces in the region were caught exposed and overwhelmed. Retreat was not a choice, it was a necessity. And for that retreat to succeed, someone had to know the way out. That someone was José Francisco Lopes. In 1867, he was tasked with guiding the Brazilian Expeditionary Column, roughly 1,500 men, soldiers and civilians combined, on a grueling march of more than 35 days through swamp, scrubland, and hostile territory. From Laguna to Miranda, through terrain with no roads, little food, and a cholera epidemic that moved through the column like a death sentence. Lopes led them forward through all of it, day after day, holding the column together through sheer willpower and unmatched knowledge of the land. The retreat from Laguna became one of the most haunting and heroic episodes in Brazilian military history. Nearly 1,000 men died, claimed by disease or by enemy fire. A young officer named Alfredo Desgranhol Taunay survived and wrote about it. His account, published in 1871 as Retirada da Laguna, placed José Francisco Lopes at the very heart of the story, not as a general, not as a politician, but as the man who knew the way and who kept walking even when every step demanded something more than ordinary courage. Part 9, 1946 to 1948. A district takes shape and earns its name. The years following the founding of the Patrimonio were years of steady, purposeful growth. More families arrived, the population expanded, and with growth came the unmistakable need for structure, for governance, for services, for the kind of administrative machinery that transforms a collection of households into a functioning community. In 1946, Federal Decree Law No. 9055 answered that need by formally creating the district, attaching it to the neighboring municipality of Nioaque. The establishment of the district was not just bureaucratic housekeeping. It meant representation. It meant the ability to lobby for roads, schools, and health care. It meant a voice in the decisions that shaped everyday life. For the residents who had built something meaningful along the Miranda River, it was a recognition long overdue. The district was the political structure that gave their community legitimacy. Then, in 1948, came the name. State Law No. 140 officially designated the district as Guia Lopes da Laguna. Every word carried weight. Guia Lopes honored the man. Da Laguna honored the place, the city in Brazil's deep south from which the legendary retreat had begun. The name was not just an address, it was a declaration of identity, a compact between a community and its history. With that name, the path to full municipal independence was all but inevitable.
Part 12, Today, Heritage, Nature, and the Road Ahead. Today, Guia Lopes da Laguna stands as one of those rare places where history and nature exist in almost perfect balance. The municipality is part of the Serra da Bodoquena tourism complex, a region that includes the world-famous city of Bonito and its extraordinary river systems, along with Jardim and Bodoquena. Together, they form a corridor of natural wonder in the heart of Brazil. Crystal-clear rivers, caves, waterfalls, and an ecosystem of staggering biodiversity that draws visitors from across the globe. The memory of José Francisco Lopes is very much alive here. It lives in street names and school curricula, in civic celebrations and local pride. The story of the retreat from Laguna is not something that happened to someone else, somewhere else. It happened here, on this ground, to a man whose name the city still carries. That connection between past and present is not ornamental, it is foundational. It tells every new generation who they are and where they come from. The challenge now, as it is for communities everywhere, is to build forward without losing what makes this place irreplaceable, to convert natural and cultural heritage into sustainable development, to create jobs, opportunity, and quality of life for the people who live here, not just for those who visit. Guia Lopes da Laguna has never had an easy history, but it has always had something more valuable, the courage to keep going. That, too, is part of the legacy of its guide. Guia Lopes da Laguna, Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. A history in 12 parts, from the 16th century to the present day,